Okay, this is a shir on Likutei Sichos, Chelek, the 20th volume of Likutei Sichos, the Sicha named Vayishlach, and Yutas Kislev, the 19th of Kislev. The 19th of Kislev being the day that the Alter Rebbe, first Rebbe of Chabad, was released from prison 200 and something years ago in St. Petersburg, Russia, where he was arrested for trumped up charges. Today when we say the word Trump, you have to be careful. Trumped up charges of treason against the government. He was sending money to Turkey, to Israel, which was under the Turks at the time, that were fighting the Ruskies. So it was, there was a false allegation against him that he was trying to do something against the Tsar, and he was arrested, and then he was released. After he came out of prison, he wrote a very special letter to his Hasidim. You see, what's not so pleasant to talk about is the fact that the allegations that were spoken to the government against him were actually brought by opponents of Hasidism, Jewish opponents. Yeah, we're known as mitnagdim, the opponents. And this was not from the high level of their leadership. This didn't have any rabbinic sanction, but the riffraff decided that they would take the matter in their own hands and they would get the Alter Rebbe arrested. And in this way, I guess if you don't like the message, kill the messenger. This way they would get the messenger out of the way, and Hasidism would not have its very special growth the way it did grow in the end. So after the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, he wrote a very special letter, powerful letter, to his Hasidim, and he said, basically, the purpose of writing this letter was to say that he wants, it was a big victory. The Alter Rebbe was interrogated by the Tsar's people, very high-level intellectuals, Minister of Education, Minister of Philosophy. They came and they looked into the Hasidic movement. The Alter Rebbe had to give very elaborate answers. This wasn't just, there was serious questions that were posed to him, and he gave long, elaborate answers. Today we have those, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, we got access to the files that they kept all the way back to the Tsar's times. They've printed all those answers. Very fascinating to read them. This was before, this was after he wrote the Tanya. Alter Rebbe saw that from heaven, part of the reason he was in prison was because he wrote the Tanya, and therefore he allowed the teachings of Hasidism to be broadcast all over. At any rate, he wrote a letter to the Hasidim: don't do tit for tat, so to speak. Don't go and feel so what do you say? When you say victorious, don't feel so victorious and proud that now you're going to go out there and be derogatory, or perhaps even worse, to the opponents who caused this whole anguish in the first place. The Alter Rebbe said, when something good happens, you have to become more humble. This was a greatness with Alter Rebbe, that he wanted. The first thing he did when he came out is he said, I'm very happy I got out, but I want to make sure that you don't take this, God forbid, in a non-peaceful direction. And the first paragraph here, we lay out what did Alter Rebbe write in particular. He says, after he came from St. Petersburg, he was released. He said, any time Hashem does a kindness to somebody, it really should cause the person to feel more humble, more lowly of spirit. Why is that? You see, let's take an example. Somebody just said that today's newspaper, it says Elon Musk is worth $400 billion. Okay, very good. So when somebody does some incredible, great kindness to somebody, how should he feel? Naturally, people feel very arrogant. That's a natural feeling. We know that many times rich people or successful people or lucky people start feeling like they deserve it, they're better than ever, their superiority. Alter Rebbe says exactly the opposite. If you understand that it's Hashem who did a chesed to you, if Hashem did a kindness to you, that means that it's literally kirvat Elokim mamash, it's literally Hashem's closeness to you. And the more great kindness that Hashem has done to you, in other words, the more you're successful, you understand that Hashem is even closer to you now. If you're more in Hashem's presence, so you have to be even more subservient. You have to even be more less egoistic. And the greater, Alter Rebbe is taking, you understand what he's doing here? The thing that should cause you the most arrogance is the greatness of your success. Alter Rebbe is saying, if just realize, and of course most people realize, if they think into it a second, their success is from Hashem. If your success is from Hashem, the more successful you are, the more you're in Hashem's presence. The more you're in Hashem's presence. Are you ridiculous? In front of Hashem, you're going to lift yourself up. Obviously, if you understand what Hashem is and how insignificant you are compared to the greatness of Hashem, you'll be even more bottle, less ego. So therefore, Yaakov, okay, that's what Alter Rebbe wrote about the concept of being blessed with chesed, with kindness. It should lead to more bittul, to more smallness. Says the Alter Rebbe, therefore, in our parsha this week, Yaakov Avinu, after he comes from Lavan, and he's blessed with 11 children already, plus 11, more than that. We made the cheshbon, he has 25 kids already. He has 11 boys, each one had a twin. He had, there was two twins with one of them. Which one had two twins? One of them had two twins together with them, and Dina. So yeah, I think we already had 25 kids at this stage. He has an abundance of wealth. It's 4 wives, not to mention 4 wives. and he's just hugely wealthy. But he says, now I have to go and meet Esav. I feel small. Katonti, I feel small. Mikol chasadim, from all the kindnesses, God. What does he mean to say? This is an innovative shot. This is not, says the Alter Rebbe, this means that because Hashem has done so much kindness to me, Yaakov is saying, I feel so small in your presence, Hashem, because there's a special level of bittul, of ego minimization, which comes because of the closeness to Hashem. It's automatic. If you're in closeness to Hashem, then obviously you're going to be less significant. Okay, that's the way the Alter Rebbe learns these words of Yaakov. Rashi on these words says a little bit different. Perhaps not just a little different, but the total opposite. He says that Yaakov says, Nitma'atu zichriyotai, my merits have become diminished because you've already paid out of my account so much goodness and kindness. How much could I have already had in my account? Let's say everybody does mitzvahs, and because of mitzvahs, they have a certain energy level, chips, let's say, in their account. When you take the ATM and you take stuff out of your account, if you take something out of the account, the balance is less. He says, Hashem, you've done so much tremendously kind things to me. I figure that I have no balance left in my account, and therefore, maybe since you have promised me, because you did promise me 20-something years ago, you promised me, before I set out on my journey that you will bring me back safely. Maybe in the meantime, you've given me so much good, and I have become sullied with sin, and this will cause the fact that I don't have enough balance to protect me from Esav, and maybe I will be given over to the hands of Esav. So in other words, the way Rashi learns it, this is why Yaakov prays to Hashem and says, I'm scared, and he says, please save me from Esav, although Hashem has already promised him way back that he will protect him, will be with him. But Yaakov is saying, I've had so much goodness and kindness done to me. I'm scared. Maybe I've used up all my credit. The Alter Rebbe is, however, the way the Alter Rebbe translates it, that I feel small because you've done so much good to me. I'm in your presence. He teaches it the way we have to learn a lesson in serving Hashem. And really, this means it can be relevant to every single Jew. That the more kindness Hashem does to you, you have to watch yourself and understand that you need to have the proper reaction, which is smallness, not arrogance. This is also, so 1 second. So there's two parallel and divergent interpretations. The Alter Rebbe is telling us, if you have goodness done to you, feel small. Rashi is saying that Yaakov was saying something else. Yaakov is saying, I've had so much good, I think I don't have any credit left. They're two different things. So says the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe is telling you what to learn. He's giving a message. If you have goodness come to you, don't let it make you arrogant. Realize you're in the presence of Hashem. Hashem is close to you. Become small. Yaakov is praying. Yaakov is asking Hashem to protect him. And he's scared before Esav. So what does it mean when he says katonti, when he says I'm worried, I'm scared because I'm small? Here, what Rashi says makes much better sense. He's saying I feel small because maybe I have no balance left to be able to pull from, to have the merit to protect me. The Alter Rebbe wrote this already post miracle. Yaakov is asking before he meets Esav. He's saying, I feel maybe I don't have enough balance. The Alter Rebbe is saying, obviously I did have enough balance because I've just been released from prison. I'm coming from St. Petersburg victorious. Now he's saying, together with thanking Hashem about the great kindness, I want to warn the Hasidim, I want to warn all the fellowship of the Hasidim that because we have such a great kindness from Hashem, Hashem has done something giant with us. Guys, be careful. Don't let your hearts become arrogant over others. Don't be competitive against others now because we won and now we can just, we can go and say, we can flaunt it. The Alter Rebbe uses language that don't whistle on them. There's a concept, I don't know how it translates in English. In Yiddish, there's a concept, pfeif auf der Welt, like pipe on the world, whistle on the world. Like, don't act like that. We have to be humble. So in that context, Alter Rebbe's interpretation of katonti, I feel small, makes perfect sense. Hashem did the kindness. Remember, when he does kindness, you feel small. Yaakov is asking Hashem for protection, and he's saying, I don't feel I deserve it. So that means something else. He's saying, I don't feel that I have enough merits left. You've done so much kindness for me. I think my ATM is empty. Okay, so the two different interpretations fit the two different scenarios, which would mean to say, if you're going to pray to Hashem for something, you would say, Hashem, I don't think I deserve it, but please. And if something really good has happened to me, you come to Hashem and he says, Hashem, I want to thank you, and I won't fall into the trap of feeling arrogant. I feel humble that if you did so much kindness to me, it means you're so close to me, and obviously that has to make me feel more humble. Okay, two modes. Says the Rebbe in paragraph 2. We have to understand, however, in the Panimius, in the inner track, let's understand about Yaakov. How could Yaakov think that he sinned, and that's why he didn't deserve, maybe he wouldn't be deserved to be saved from Esav? Now, if you want to say that he had less merits, there's two parts in the Rashi. Rashi says, if you notice, I'm scared, right? Maybe katonti, my merits are small, and maybe I got dirty from sin. The first part, we understand that he says, I feel that my merits have become diminished because I've made so many withdrawals from my account because you give me so much good. That I understand. I understand. The Yaakov saying, I don't have unlimited credit in heaven, and maybe I've used it. Because especially when Hashem does a miracle, there's a concept we should be very cautious when asking for miracles. When Hashem does a miracle, there's a big debit from our account. So we can understand why he feels his so to speak, his balance may be diminished because of the great kindness of miracles Hashem did. However, that's not a sin. In other words, when you make a big withdrawal from your account, you haven't done anything wrong. It's your account. Hashem did miracles. What's this business about being scared of sin? He says, I was in Lavan and I kept this 630 mitzvahs. So to say about Yaakov that literally he sinned is very difficult. The Rebbe takes it, I guess the Rebbe is asking now closer to us. Yaakov was 4,003, but almost 4,000 years ago. I mean, we know what the Torah tells us about him. The Alter Rebbe, only 200 years ago, figure that that it's only the Rebbe is the 7th generation from the Alter Rebbe. If you go back, the Rebbe would have known somebody who knew the Alter Rebbe, or maybe almost somebody, definitely somebody who knew the Alter Rebbe. So it's very close. There's a very clear historical. You don't have to rely on so to speak, on it's closer to our time. So the Rebbe takes the Alter Rebbe and basically asks a question, which then he says the same question is the way we understand Yaakov. Here's what the Rebbe asks. The fact that the Alter Rebbe writes in this letter, he doesn't say that this is the way Yaakov felt. He felt small after Hashem did kindness to him. He also continues and he says, that's why Yaakov is apologetic to Hashem, why he's scared of Esav. I mean, he's coming and praying to Hashem to protect him from Esav, and in his mind, he has to apologize to Hashem for even asking. Why? Because Hashem has promised him. Imagine somebody promises you, I'll take care of you, and you come back and say, are you really going to take care of me? Hello? Are you for real? I just said I'm going to take care of you. So Hashem had promised to take care of him. Now Yaakov is giving an apology. He's explaining, why am I asking again? What he meant to say is because I'm very small. First of all, I don't believe I deserve it. And maybe there's always a possibility that I've sinned. Nidme be'enov shechata. It appeared in his eyes, in Yaakov's eyes, maybe that he sinned. So from that we understand that the Alter Rebbe is saying that not just do I feel small because of the great kindness that Hashem has done, and Hashem is close to me and I'm small, but there's also, it relates also to what Yaakov says about feeling that I've sinned. The way Rashi learns that feeling that I've sinned. In other words, that somehow the Alter Rebbe, even after these great miracles happen, and he comes from St. Petersburg, is feeling that maybe, not just I feel small because Hashem has done such kindness, maybe I've sinned, maybe I've done something wrong. So what does that mean? What does it mean, maybe I've done something wrong? I mean, the Alter Rebbe. So this would be leading us to understand that here the Alter Rebbe is also trying to hint that without taking into account that after he was in prison, the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich, both who came to him in a vision, they told him that he will be released and he's going to continue to reveal the secrets of Hasidism with even greater power and strength. However, what we understand that he's still asking Hashem that he should be successful. In other words, you have to understand that if he's just saying thank you, saying I feel small, then why is he mentioning that perhaps I've sinned? Obviously, here is not just saying thank you. He's also saying to Hashem, just like Yaakov is praying for protection from Esav. The Alter Rebbe is praying that although his predecessors have just blessed him that he'll go out of prison, he'll be successful, he's asking Hashem for protection. Because what the Alter Rebbe did was, Yaakov went to meet Esav. The Alter Rebbe was doing something not different. He was out to teach the world the depth of the Torah, which the forces of negativity didn't want. Because once really the whole world, all of us see the world from the lens of Hasidism, really it's game over. If you see Hashem everywhere, if we're able to get those glasses the Alter Rebbe had, if he's able to successfully give it to us by teaching us enough and by us meditating enough, and you see the world differently, if enough of us see the world differently, the facade goes away, game over. So the negativity, the klippa, the sitra achra, the negative forces doesn't want it. So he's praying to Hashem for protection. He's praying to Hashem for protection. Now he's saying, but just like Yaakov, maybe I sinned. So now we have to understand, how could you say the Alter Rebbe says, I feel katonti, I feel small and undeserving, maybe I've sinned. So I think, this is just my feeling, that the Rebbe is asking the question on the Alter Rebbe, how could you say the Alter Rebbe sinned? Because we have much more intimate knowledge of the Alter Rebbe, and we know who he was and how he was living his life firsthand, almost like we have firsthand. It doesn't make sense, doesn't fit to say he sinned. Yaakov also doesn't make sense, but for Yaakov, we have to know that the Torah tells us that the forefathers were Merkava, they were thing, but I think, it's just my personal feeling, I don't know if this is pshat, that the Rebbe is asking the question of the Alter Rebbe is a much more, it's a stronger question in terms of our relative closeness and generation to the Alter Rebbe, knowing what kind of a tzaddik he was. So how can he be saying this? And therefore the same question is on Yaakov. What do you mean Yaakov is saying, maybe I sinned? Yaakov is Yaakov a tzaddik. So let's understand. Paragraph 3. In general, the explanation is, here's an explanation, a fascinating explanation. How can we say that tzaddikim look at themselves as being sinful? And remember, we're not saying, sometimes a person will come and say, oh, look at me. Some will say, well, you're such a great guy. I say, no, you don't really know. I'm really sinful. He doesn't mean it. There's a lot of people make themselves like they're humble. Yeah, gava psula, anava, kaviyachol anava, as if they're humble. No, I'm really a sinner. Yaakov Avinu, the Alter Rebbe, that there's no false narrative. So what does it mean they thought they sinned? Paragraph 3. Generally, the explanation is when a person goes to a higher level, so a thing that he has done when he was on a lower level, which then was not considered a sin, now at the higher level, retroactively, what he did back then, compared to that, it was sinful, or at least it wasn't at the highest level. Which would mean to say that not just if he does that thing now, is it going to be a sin? But even if he doesn't do it anymore, the fact that he's done it before, it's done deal. And at that time, there was nothing wrong with it. But now, with the new reality that he reaches, what he did back then wasn't up to par. So that's why we could say that by Yaakov and about Alter Rebbe, the way they are now in the higher level, they're saying maybe I have to do teshuvah for something I did in the past, which then wasn't a problem, wasn't an issue. But now looking back, I could have done better. Okay, so that would be a way of understanding how you can be a great tzaddik, not done anything wrong, but let's just give a physical example. You send your shirt, a dirty shirt, into the cleaners, comes back. So initially it looks clean. Now when you wear it, now it's all clean. Now you look at it more closely, you see that there's still a little dot there. Before that dot, you wouldn't, when you gave the shirt into the cleaners, you wouldn't have pointed out that dot. Who cares? But now that dot shines out. It's not a new dot. It's not new. It was there when everything was there. It didn't matter. But now that you've cleaned up and you're in a new place, what you did then, it turns out it's not becoming. So that would be a way to explain how you could be high level, and still you're still thinking maybe I'm not at the best level because now some of the things I did were below me. That's not enough explanation, says the Rabbi. Why? Because indeed, when you did what you did, wasn't a sin. Nonetheless, when you reach the higher level, it is considered like something amiss, something a sin. So that means it's obviously not a very simple, it's not a glatte zach, it's not a smooth thing that you did. So at that time, you also should have not done it. In other words, if now looking back, it's not right, that means that also then it wasn't right. It wasn't right. So how's the Alter Rebbe and Yaakov? It still doesn't explain how they can be so perfect and yet be scared that they messed up. I didn't say messed up, that they did a chet. How can you say that? With Alter Rebbe and Yaakov Avinu. So here we have verse 4. There's a pirush of the Panim Yofis. The Panim Yofis was known as Rabbi Pinchas Baal Hafla. He was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich. And he wrote a book called Panim Yafot, which means beautiful faces. I did a quick Google search just to make sure that I remembered who the Panim Yafot was. The Panim Yafos, if you do in Google, you type in Panim Yafot, it'll tell you also that Pinchas Baal Hafla will give you the title, the first page of the book from Hebrew books. But then you have all kinds of pictures of girls. I realized why is my Google giving me pictures? Because Panim Yafot means nice faces, literally in Hebrew. So you have to be careful. Anyway, but Panim Yafos that's just the Milsa de Bedichas. The Panim Yafos is a sefer by the Pinchas Baal Hafla, one of the Talmidim of Maggid. And it's interesting that Rebbe should quote him and build the explanation on this. So the student of the Maggid of Mezrich, called Panim Yafos, he explains like this. What does it mean, Katonti V'kol HaChasadim, when Yaakov says, I've become small from all the kindnesses? He says, when the neshamas, when the souls go up from one world to another world. In other words, when tzaddikim climb the ladder, it says that tzaddikim never have rest. They're always going from strength to strength. So as they climb the ladder of further greatness, so before they go up into a higher world, they first return to a state of smallness, similar to what the Alter Rebbe writes in the introduction to Shari Yichud V'Emunah in the second chapter of Tanya, that there's a concept of Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'Kam. There's a verse in Proverbs in Mishlei, where Shlomo HaMelech says that Tzadik falls 7 times and rises. And basically what the Alter Rebbe there says is that sometimes you fall back. In other words, there's a base education, Sometimes when you try and climb to the next level, you're in a state of darkness and you have to fall back to your earliest education. And if it's a proper education, may not be the highest level, but if it's a sound education, you'll be okay. Here the Panim Yafis says it like this, a little bit nuanced, more nuanced. He says, before, between one greatness and the next greatness, there's a second smallness. In other words, if I may explain it like this. Let's say I want to talk. Let's talk money. And money is, I think, is easier to visualize. Let's say a person makes what figure should we use? A million. Okay, a million. Let's say the person makes first million. Now he embarks on business. It could be that now he invests most of that million, and for a time, he has a katnus, he has a smallness. It looks like, in order to really make, he has to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable, chasuf, he's opened himself up. He invested in something that could go either way. He now has a certain katnus. He has a smallness. If things go right, he may be very nervous right now. If things go right, he'll get to a much bigger gadlus, a much bigger greatness. So he reached greatness. If he stays there, he's not going to get anywhere. He has to become vulnerable. And now, in a stage, he's in smallness, he's in dangerous territory. But that's a stepping stone to greater godless. So the way he learns this in Yaakov saying like this, Katonti, I feel small, because Yaakov is going now to a new level. He's going from outside Israel to Israel. He's coming back with his family. He's about to establish the Jewish homeland, the Jewish 12 tribes. He's going back to his father's land, living Lavan. He's great because now he has his whole family. He's already great, and now he's trying to jump into a higher level. He says, Katonti, now I feel vulnerable. I feel small. I feel terrified. I'm about to meet Esav. It's the smallness that comes before the next leap, before the next greatness. Now we'll understand why Yaakov says, save me, Hashem, from my brother from Esav. Even though that Hashem has promised me, and even though I've seen that Hashem picked me up to great heights, now I feel vulnerable, I feel small, and I need Hashem to help me now. And the Panim Yafis explains that even though, in a sense, if you think about it, before the person made his first money, let's go back to the money example. Before the person made his first money, he had nothing. He made his first million. Now, when he endangers himself, he's still much better off. He's still higher than he was before, when he didn't reach his first benchmark, right? But still, there's a vulnerability. In other words, what could happen? Let's think about it. What could happen? He's not going to lose it all. Maybe he didn't endanger it all. He'll still be ahead. He started off with $100,000. He has a katnus now. Maybe he's endangered now 500, but he'll still be, even if he falls, he'll still be ahead of the game. But even though it's still above the previous state in a sense, but the katnus, that feeling of small, that contraction, that vulnerability, that pachad, that scaredness, means that he needs to be protected. In other words, he feels himself in a state of danger. We've all experienced, I think, that you get older and now there's a lot more at stake. Even if what you're trying to do won't happen, you'll still be better off than when you started off place 10 years ago. But still, it's more scary. It's still very scary. Like, if you do the dollars and cents, you weren't that scared before you started. Even now, what you're scared about, even in the worst scenario, may be better than where you were 10 years ago. You're still ahead of the game. But still, that katnus, that fear, that scaredness, that smallness, that vulnerability is a place where you need protection. You call out to Hashem, and there's a tension there, perhaps even more than when you started, because you're trying to get somewhere greater, but there's a bottleneck in between. There's a leap of faith, but requires, it's dangerous. And this is the way I understand what the Panim Yafis is saying, what the Rebbe is saying. And the Rebbe says, interesting that we find this also in intellect. When you understand something and then somebody poses deep questions on the thing, which mix you up and confuse you, you understood it, and now somebody rips questions into your understanding, and now you lost. Really, then you have to be very careful because you've lost. It seems like you've lost your first conceptualization, but really, what's going to happen after you get the answers is, wow, once you understood the questions and it was almost taken apart, and now it's brought together again by a deeper understanding of the answer. Wow. But that state where you feel defenseless or you feel lost is a state which requires shmira. It's a state where you have to cry out to Hashem and say, I need to be guarded, I need protection. This says in the square brackets now. Similarly, we can understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The Alter Rebbe is saying that I'm scared. Maybe I became dirty with sin. Sin isn't sin. The word sin can also be off the mark. In other words, based on the level I'm heading towards right now, I'm in a state where I may not be fully at my game. I may be off the mark. I may be a little bit off target, which means I'm not fully fulfilling what my potential is. And that itself is connected with the great kindness Hashem has done to me. Because the moment Hashem did for Yaakov such amazing kindnesses, what it did is not just bring out that now he says I have a less of a balance, but it also led him to be in a state that maybe his service of Hashem is too small for the new level he's at. He's growing into a new level, but maybe right now he's off the mark. So it's all connected. The great chesed Hashem does, which should enable greater service, may actually point out that I'm not fully serving to my full capacity in the new state of being. Okay. Now we continue. Paragraph 5. This is also the way we'll understand about, in connection with Alter Rebbe, it's known that the concept of Yafutzu Ma'inotecha Chutza, what the Baal Shem Tov was told when he went up to see the Mashiach in the higher worlds. Baal Shem Tov asked Mashiach, when are you coming? Baal Shem Tov answered him in the words of Shlomo HaMelech, I'm going to come when your well springs of Hasidism will spread forth outside. So the Alter Rebbe was tasked with this. Mission. Mostly, this started with Alter Rebbe's life after he came out of St. Petersburg, which means that it shows you that the experience of the imprisonment and the opportunity, spiritual opportunity he was granted after that, cannot be compared to the greatness he had before he entered the imprisonment in St. Petersburg. In Yiddish, we call it Peterburg. Right? In Russian also it's called Peterburg. And so there's his greatness before he was imprisoned, and then there's the imprisonment, and then there's the new level of spreading the well springs of Hasidus that he achieves after his imprisonment. So in other words, he has a certain katonti, he has a certain smallness. We said that between one level of greatness, says the Panim Yofis, there's a smallness which needs protection. He has this squashedness, so to speak, in prison. Why? Because the imprisonment included a lot of great suffering. You know, with the Barditchev, a very fascinating discussion that Rabbi Yitzchak of Barditchev told Alter Rebbe, he says, why did you allow yourself to be taken into prison? Why did you take so much on your shoulders? So much suffering. You had spiritual suffering. Your nefesh suffered. Your body suffered. And Rabbi Yitzchak, I mean, was this the choice of the Alter Rebbe? It turns out, yes. The Barditchev said, we could have achieved what we needed to achieve with more transcendent experience. In other words, perhaps we could have fought a spiritual battle. We didn't need you to actually live through physical hardship and torture. But the Alter Rebbe was saying, which the Baditchever, the Baditchever was based on the Alter Rebbe, you went through too much suffering. Why did you agree to go through that suffering? So in other words, it tells us that there was plenty of suffering. It's a different discussion why the Alter Rebbe wanted and understood that there needs to be an experience to really have the experience here on earth was very important. Not just it should be a transcendent spiritual experience. But at any rate, so we understand he suffered. We also understand that there were 3 hours after he was released where he was delivered to the wrong address. A fascinating story. Yeah, they asked him, where do you want to go after you're released? And he gave the address where there was one of his Hasidim. But in that same building on a different floor, there was an opponent. And they delivered him to the wrong address. And when the opponent saw the Alter Rebbe was there, so he was a fellow Jew, so he brought him in and they offered him a cup of tea. He poured him a cup of tea, but then he started cursing him out. And the Alter Rebbe said, and the Hasidim knew the Alter Rebbe was released, they're looking for him. So one guy said, 1 second, maybe they took him upstairs. They came and they found him upstairs. And they found this guy screaming at Alter Rebbe. They wanted it. The Alter Rebbe says, no. He says, let's take you out. He says, I have to finish my tea. He was nice. He gave me a tea. I have to respect my. But later, the Alter Rebbe said that was more, even all the physical and emotional anguish of the prison, he had more emotional anguish when he was being berated in this house of this opponent. Because here it was a fellow Jew. It was a fellow Jew, and it was after he went through all this, what he went through, and the non-Jews released him, and now this Jew is lacing into him. So he had a lot of, in other words, he had suffering. So we understand that this is considered like katonti, like a smallness compared to the previous greatness that Alter Rebbe was before he entered prison. As we see that the Rebbe Rashab says, the Rebbe Rashab says like this, he prefaces, even though it's hard to say, this is a quote, even though it's hard to say, but it is actually this way that the revelation of light that came to the world through the Alter Rebbe after his Peterburg experience was like what our sages tell us, that the olive, when you crush it, you take the oil out of it. So by the Rebbe Rashab using this parable, we understand that if it's like crushing the oil, if it's like crushing an olive, so the experience of the imprisonment was a smallness also compared to the pre-Peterburg, the pre-imprisonment. Then there was greatness. He had greatness on one level. He had smallness, katonti, and now he has the greatness after he gets released. What happens when you squeeze an olive? When you squeeze an olive, so when the olive is in the press, he doesn't have either of the two advantages that an olive has. An olive has an advantage that it gives out oil. If it's under the press and the oil hasn't come out yet, it's not oil yet, but it's also not a fruit. If you don't put an olive into the press, you can use it as a fruit. When it's in the press, it's neither a fruit nor is it oil. It's nishtayin, nishtayir. It doesn't have this gadlus or that gadlus. It doesn't have this advantage, that advantage. Therefore, the same is the Alter Rebbe when he was in prison. Not just then couldn't he embark on his new version of spreading Hasidus like post-Peterburg. Even when he was in prison, he couldn't even do what he was doing up till that time. There was nobody there he could say Hasidus for. He didn't let people in. When his son, the Mittler Rebbe, was in prison, they allowed people in a few times a week so he could say his discourses. With Alter Rebbe, basically he was shut down. Shut down like an olive. When it's in the press, it's not a fruit and it's not oil yet. And this thing that in that time there was no opportunity to say Chasidim when he was in prison, for the Alter Rebbe, so this impacted very much the Alter Rebbe himself. In other words, you could say, who gets affected when the Alter Rebbe can't talk? The Chasidim, not him. No. Because we find Avraham Avinu, remember Avraham Avinu had his bris and Hashem made it very hot. No visitors. And Avraham Avinu is agitated. He wants to do Gimilut Chasadim. He wants to do kindness. He wants to have guests. There were no guests. So we see that when somebody is a kind, a benevolent person, he wants to give, it's actually a pain when he can't give. It's the same way it is regarding benevolence physically that Avraham Avinu wanted to give. It's not just I'll give when it's available, but he had this urge to give. And this was to Arabs, and this was before Matan Torah. He wanted to be serving people. How much more so when we're talking after the Torah was given, and to fellow Jews, and teaching Torah to Jews, and teaching Torah in a public way. And how much more so the inner track of Torah. You can understand how the Alter Rebbe says, "Katonti, I was in a state of smallness, and I needed protection." So we have here, and the Rebbe points out that even after he came out, he requested that Hasidim should not come to him for the first few weeks. They shouldn't come till Shabbos Avarchim, the second Adar. So they couldn't come to him. They would come the Shabbos Avarchim. They couldn't come Shabbos Avarchim Tevis. It was too close. Not Shabbos Avarchim Shvat, not Or Aleph. He asked for 3 months respite. The Hasidim shouldn't come. He was diminished. Then he became greater than even before. So paragraph 6, every year we have these same concepts are talked about again, and everything starts from the Torah. Therefore, we always going to be reading in the Torah, in the portion that's close to the day of redemption, the Alter Rebbe, Yutas Kislev, either we read it on Yutas Kislev itself, or very close to it, this verse, Katonti v'kol hachasodim, where Yaakov says, I've become small through all the kindnesses you've done to me. But this is the request that Yaakov has, and it's a request of the leadership, the leaders of Yisrael. As we know that the word Nasi, which means leader, is the Rosh Tevis, is the acronym for Nitzutza Shel Yaakov Avinu, the spark of Yaakov Avinu, especially the Alter Rebbe. What are they being inspired? They're davening, and they're davening also on behalf of every Jew, that notwithstanding the fact that there's katonti, that they become small, and they may be in a state of smallness, but should be fulfilled in them the promise that Hashem gives them, Heitev, Eitiv, Imach, that I will certainly do good with you, and I will make your children like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted because of their great abundance. So what is it? To recap here, why am I so excited about this? Because first of all, the Panim Yofis gives us, there's 3 aspects. There's the Alter Rebbe telling us, Katonti, this incredible teaching that when Hashem does something kind to you, a Yishmael, elsewhere the Alter Rebbe explains, Yishmael becomes uplifted because he becomes great. He can also do chesed, but the chesed comes from arrogance. I'm such a big guy. I can stoop down and help poor people because he's also a son of Abraham. But the Yaakov feeling is Hashem did such kindness to me, and I'm so nothing. And Avram's Anochi Afar Ve'efra, I'm like ash and dust. His chesed comes from feeling small. So Yaakov mirrors the chesed of Avraham. When something nice happens, he feels small, so close to Hashem, I'm so undeserving. That allows for smallness. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. I feel after I've been released from prison. Therefore, he tells us Chassidim, let's be humble. At the same time, there's also a notion here that we're praying. That's for the past. At the same time, there's also consistent with Yaakov Avinu here praying for the future, for protection for Esav. The Alter Rebbe is also praying for protection in the future path he has of serving Hashem, of disseminating the wellsprings of Hasidism, that he should have protection. And there he says, I feel maybe I don't deserve this protection because maybe I've done a sin. And we explain it's not literally a sin. What we're saying is maybe compared to what I could have done, I haven't lived up to it. How can you say that? Such great people. So therefore, that the Panim Yofis introduces something here and says that it's a natural thing that when you go from greatness to greatness, that there's a period, there's a stage of katoiti, there's a stage of smallness, and that I call it vulnerability. That smallness is a dangerous spot. You need special protection from Hashem because you're not yet at the new place and you're no longer at the old place. The Alter Rebbe was in prison, and even when he first got out, he was still in a state of diminishment, katonti. And at this state where I'm not fully able to reach the next stage, but I don't have the advantages of the previous stage either. I'm in between. I call out to Hashem. Yaakov calls out to Hashem. He says, Katonti, I feel I've been blessed so much, but now I'm in this state where I have to face Esav, and I didn't yet get to my next level. And I'm in a state of in between. I'm scared, and I pray to Hashem. And that's acceptable. And so for all of us, Here's what I see, that sometimes a person will feel scared, vulnerable, small, uncertain, not because you look back at him and you say, 1 second, but look at what you have, look what you've done. Look at, I mean, even if what you're worried about happens, you're not going to be back worse than where you started. You're still ahead of the game. It doesn't matter. That doesn't help, because he's already past that. Now he's trying to get to the next level, and now he's in a state of diminishment, and vulnerability, and fear. So that's not to be worried about. You call out to Hashem. It's a natural thing, in other words. And that is the cycle of growth. To go from godless to godless, sometimes you have to go through katnus, you have to go from greatness to greatness, you have to go through smallness.